So if I recall from our lecture last week, we really had a very good discussion on what research is. I should be sharing that recording soon. I just uploaded it to ICT. So once they share the link, I will put it up and then post for you on the group, on the WhatsApp group, let you know that it's now available. But I think we had a very, very good discussion on what we believe research is. And I believe that will give us the beginning or headway for the concepts that we are going to look at. Now, looking at the theory and the practical side, there's usually quite a disconnect there on the talking about the concepts and then putting it into practice. But I suggest let's have really in-depth discussion. That's one. Two, especially when we're doing assignments on concept paper writing, proposal writing, I would suggest that we become as hands-on as possible. Let's have as much discussion as possible, even outside class, because this is something, it's a skill. Research is a skill. We may talk about the concepts here, but when it comes to the practical, the practical side, it's doable. It's not undoable. It's very doable. I've seen students do it. So far, I think now for this year, I've just signed off 6 students who have just finished their dissertations, which have been approved. So nothing is impossible. It is simply to start the practical side of things, and then the logic begins to reveal itself over time. So we want to look at the layers, the different layers of research, how we get into it, and let's be as vocal as possible with what we're doing. Let us voice any issues that we may find problematic. So we are going to look at some of the concepts of research. We will begin with research philosophy. So I'm sure most of us have heard of the term philosophy. For me, whenever I talk about philosophy, I remember some of the first time I encountered philosophy as an undergraduate. I remember people like, I think it was Socrates who said, I think, therefore I am. So so philosophy is something that I think to me, it is something that reasons with the abstract. It's as abstract as possible, but however, gives that broader meaning to things, to the practical things that we're going to follow, that are going to follow us. That the practically, for example, when Socrates said, I think, therefore I am, he asked a very basic question: how do I know I exist? Maybe I'm just an imagination. What is it that makes me think I exist? And of course, many things, and of course, it comes to the very basic question of why do I exist? And by the time somebody begins to ask that question of why do I exist, or how do I even know that I exist, I think it sometimes points to the in quotes, what I would like to say, the nothingness of our lives. There are times when you can feel so insignificant, or you can feel so hopeless, especially when challenges come, and you wonder, I'm not in control of anything. But when Socrates comes out and says, I think, therefore you do exist, and your existence, we may not add that it doesn't answer of why you exist, and that's where religion comes in. Why do I exist? Why am I here? And so on. And once you have that answer, when religion answers that for you, then you have a purpose for why you exist. So you can already see philosophy there is really bringing someone out of maybe a pit where someone may not understand why they are here. The same thing also with research. There's also philosophical outlooks of research, and the purpose of these philosophical outlooks is to guide us guide us on how we can approach a certain subject. Just like Socrates' answer gives meaning, or rather gives reason to believe in our existence, and religion gives meaning to our lives. Religion, culture, and so on and so forth, they give meaning to our lives and give us guidance on where to go and how to go. Also, research philosophy guides us on how we approach a certain topic, or a certain discussion, or a certain question. Yeah, a question, and let me just put here a question mark, because that's what research is about. The philosophy will guide us on how we approach a certain question. So we're going to look at research philosophy in detail. Then research philosophy leads to approaches, yeah, because the philosophy tells us on how we approach a question, how we approach that question. Then it also helps us select a strategy, the method, the research method. How do we select an appropriate research method or strategy to help us answer a question? Okay. Then we also have situations when one approach doesn't make sense. One approach is not enough. We need to have several approaches in order to answer a question. Then also giving validity and credibility to our findings. Once we begin to tackle our findings, we need to give them we need to solidify them, that they can be trusted. Then we look at ethics of research design. So because research deals with, as long as we are dealing with the world, an ethical element must come in. So the ethical element is to be fair and just. Okay, it's looking at fairness and justice. So this, in summary, this is what we are discussing when we look at the nature and methods of research, the concepts within research. So here we have what is normally referred to as the research onion. Like any onion, you peel away layer by layer, and the objective is that each layer must be clearly understood. It must be, we must have a clear understanding, because it logically leads to the next layer. Okay, so we begin with research philosophy as the first layer, which moves us to research approaches, then research strategies, and then we come to time horizons. In what time scale do I expect to do this research? Is this research that is longitudinal, meaning it's going to take, it's looking at a phenomena over a period of time? Or is it cross-sectional, meaning I'm looking at a particular period and only that time, and nothing beyond that? Then in the innermost part, we look at the research tools, okay? The research tools. So these are the tools, are like questionnaires, interviews, observations, so on and so forth. These should not be mistaken for research strategies. So a research strategy or method is quite far different from a research tool. So questionnaires are research tools. They are not research methods or strategies. So these are quite different, and I hope we shall differentiate them as we move along. So let us start with the outermost part, research philosophy. Before I go further, I want to ask what you think when you hear the term research philosophy, or philosophy in general.
Hello.
Hi. Okay.
Yes, please. Yes. Can we start with Sarah? Then we'll...
From the explanation that you just gave earlier, I think research philosophy is
the understanding of what exactly the research is. This could be maybe the research area. That is from my understanding.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Anyone else? Yes, Arthur.
On mine, I think it would be the mindset of the researchers.
The mindset of the researcher.
The research, yes.
Yes, that's a good one, Arthur. The mindset of the researcher. Sarah is not far off. It's yes, it has to do with the area we want to research, but more or less like, how do I approach it? How do I approach this subject? If I could imagine, let's look at an everyday problem, the everyday issues. Let us look at parenting. I'm not a parent, but my siblings are parents. My siblings have children. One has a very young daughter, 6 years, and the other has one adult child and teenagers. And I imagine the problems that they encounter as parents and the children themselves. Each problem has a different approach to it. Each problem. Take an example. If you're telling your teenage daughter to clean her room, yeah, it could be as simple as, hey, clean your room. As simple as that. If it's your 6-year-old, you may want to first bring reasoning. You may want to tell her, so and so clean your room, but you may want to say, why is this thing here? Maybe if you're trying to teach your child, your son, your daughter, the purpose of cleaning, or the reasoning behind putting things away, you may start by asking, when you find something out of place, why is this thing here? Why didn't you take it to the dustbin? Did you not know this is what you're supposed to do? The approach is quite different. You're going into detail of the reasons why we must clean up, why we must clear up after ourselves. If you've said it before, you want to kind of remind the child. If it's a teenage child, you may not want to ask those questions because you've said them over and over again since they were growing up. You've said it over and over again, and you simply come and say, hey, clean up the room, something like that. A completely different approach. The first approach is more detailed for the younger child, because you may want to instill certain principles in the child. So you may want to start, you may start by asking questions. Why do we do this? Why is this thing out of place? Did you not remember you're supposed to put it back? Did we not talk about this before? You kind of give more detail and more guidance because the child is younger and you want to instill these values. When the child is older and you know these values were actually instilled, now it's a matter of command. Clean your room. Simple and to the point. Why didn't you do it? You don't explain. You don't go to the reasons why we do this, why we do that. Because these were values that were already instilled. So you see the approach there, the philosophical, the approach is different. One, if I may use the research terms, one is qualitative, whether is quantitative. Giving command, I expect to see results. And ABCD, measurable, something quite measurable. So the approaches are different because of age group, maybe the age and because you're at a different stage of learning. The two children are at different stages of learning. So it's also the same thing with the research philosophy. Like Arthur said, the mindset. What mindset should I approach this with? Should I tackle this thing? So the philosophy, we have two different camps, two very, very different camps, although those are not the only ones, but we have two different camps, usually from literature. You will find they are kind of at loggerheads, but they really shouldn't be at loggerheads because it's a different approach for a different problem. Yeah. So we have two really opposite camps in philosophy. And these are the ones I'm outlining here. Positivism and phenomenology. Yeah. From these, others may come up: realism, pragmatism. But let's first focus on these two most generic: positivism and phenomenology. So these two differ, they're quite opposite of each other. They're opposite in terms of logic, ethics, and so on and so forth. So in terms of logic, the study of valid reasoning, how to reason. Yeah? How to reason regarding the two differ, the two philosophies differ. You remember the example of the children, the teenage child and the 6-year-old. The reasoning behind how we tell them, how we guide the child to do something in the household differs. One has attained a certain level of reasoning and values. The other, the reasoning and values are developed. Okay, in actual, both senses are actually developing, but one has a higher level, advanced level of reasoning. So the how to reason differs greatly between these two philosophical mindsets. Yeah. The second is ethics, the study of right and wrong, of what would be considered fair and just for us to come to study something correctly, or how to study it wrong. Yeah. Let me just give an example for the two cases when it comes to logic and ethics. How would I approach, okay, let me put it another way. How do you think scientists first approached COVID-19 when it first appeared on the scene, on the global scene, or even at the national scene? The very first scientists who saw COVID probably in China, because I think that was the origin. How did they approach it? What was the logic? And how is it approached now? There's a big difference with the line of reasoning. At the very beginning, very little or nothing was known about COVID-19. I'm sure when the first patients showed up in hospital, when they saw a number of patients, I think doctors or scientists, not doctors necessarily, but scientists, their approach was quite different from, let us say, in 2021 or 2022. The approach was quite different when a lot more knowledge had been developed about this particular phenomena of COVID-19. So the reasoning differs. When something is very little or nothing is known, then the questions being asked are quite different. What is this thing? Exploration. It talks about, the reasoning looks at exploration. Then, if if it is now, the question is how. How is this happening? Because quite a number of, you already know the what, but you may be asking now how. If a new, for example, a new strain of COVID-19 showed up, and the question would be, how does it spread? How does it spread in comparison to the other strains, the previous strains? So the approach is quite different because quite a bit of knowledge has been developed. So the logic of how it is approached differs. The ethics now, what is right and wrong with the two studies would be different. in the first case, when we're exploring, maybe at that time, they were actually dealing with patients, closely dealing with people who were suffering, who had contracted the COVID-19 virus. And probably the ethical elements being considered at the time were quite different because you're dealing with live subjects. Right now, scientists maybe are dealing with aggregated data. So the ethical elements are quite different. What is considered fair and just for a subject, a live subject, and then for aggregated data is quite different. The ethical elements that are being considered, how we should act with the research. Yeah. Both cases, I am actually pointing out positivism and phenomenology, though I haven't exactly pointed out which is which, but both cases are actually talking about the two philosophical views that are guiding. Epistemology is how do we know, how do we get to know the information, how do we get to accrue more knowledge regarding a certain phenomena, the study of knowledge. How are we going to collect information and how shall we handle it? The two cases differ. Ontology, the study of being, what is. Yeah. You remember the question, what and how? Yeah. Those two research, the questions that start either way. So these are the four areas that the philosophical viewpoints will differ. Let us look at each philosophical perspective in detail. We start with positivists or positivism. Now, when we look at this slide, we see terms like positive facts. We are dealing with positive facts. So the question is there something as a negative fact? Is there such a thing as a negative fact? Well, a positive, what would we consider a positive fact, for example? What is a positive fact and what is a negative fact? What is it? Yes, please.
I'm David. Should I go on?
Yes, please go ahead, David. Please go ahead.
A positive fact to me, I think, is based on experimental results. Then a negative fact is based on assumptions.
Thank you, David. I think you've put it very well. You've put it very, very well. So I think that is clear to all. The positive facts it's based on research, on things that have been proved, on evidence that has been proved through research. So the negative facts would be assumptions. Okay, so maybe some of you may listen to my voice and say, Madame Sheba may be a very tall woman. From her voice, she may be very tall. And maybe someone makes that assumption based on that, oh, I have a friend who sounds exactly like Madame Sheba, and she's tall. So I'm assuming Madame Sheba is a very tall woman. Another person may say, no, Madame Sheba is from Fort Portal, and what I know, the ladies there are quite short. That's also an assumption. Yeah. But if someone comes and takes my height and then gets the average height of Ugandans, they say, according to Madame Sheba's recorded height and the height of Ugandans, Madame Sheba may be considered medium, more to the scale of coming to short, the shorter version. Okay, based on and those are positive facts. Yeah, that would be a positive fact. So this is what positivists look at. This is what positivists look at, something that is an observable phenomena. So take an example. A positivist would say, for you to claim Madame Sheba is tall, the question is what is considered the first thing is what is considered as tall. Maybe in Uganda, what is considered as tall may be in Uganda. What is the average height of women in Uganda? What is and that question of what is the average height would probably have come from a research which would have sampled a number of women in Uganda from the different regions and then said this is the number. This is in the western region we have this is the average height. In Central, this is the average height. In the South, this is the average height. In the North, like that. And then we get the average height of women in Uganda is this. And then when you want to determine whether Sheba is in which bracket does she fall, you actually base on those facts, on a research that is based on that. So that is typically the positivist view of things. Yeah, so it draws, let me change the color here. The quantitative part draws on measurable evidence. Okay, measurable evidence. Primarily, this kind of research, some people, when they're doing this research, they may do research for purposes of describing a phenomena. Description of a phenomena. Now, you see, we are using certain terms and emphasizing them. Whenever we're researching about something, it's a phenomena. Yeah, if we just right now Google what the term phenomena means. What it means. Here quickly I say it's an extraordinary occurrence or circumstances. It's an extraordinary occurrence or circumstance. Now, when we hear the word extraordinary, we may be saying, okay, are we saying research only looks at extraordinary things? Yes, it would be extraordinary for a certain research community. For example, COVID-19 to scientists in research, for example, in Uganda, we have that institute that looks at infectious diseases. Yeah. So for that institute of studying infectious diseases, it's extraordinary. Okay. It is something researchable for them. To the business community, it's a hindrance. Yeah. To the business community, it's a hindrance. So this phenomena, it is something, it's an occurrence that a phenomena is an occurrence that we would like to study. We would like to study and find out more about it. It is something that we would like to study and discover. And now this phenomena, the reasons for studying it as a positivist could be two. One, we may want to describe it further. Maybe our description of this phenomena is not yet clear. It's not yet clear, and we want to describe it further. But beyond that, many times a positivist's viewpoint is to predict and explain. Predict and explain. By the time I want to predict and explain something, it means there is something quite well known about this thing, but I want to give give greater prediction on a matter. Take an example. Most universities right now have adopted e-learning. One might say, and most of the time, and for most people, they have adopted open source systems that are open source based. Now the question is, they may have been you may find research which has talked about open source software and adoptability, and they may have maybe concluded saying that normally most research may have concluded that normally open source software applications have a lower adoption rate because they are usually considered maybe not easy to use. So we may have certain research which may want to predict and explain whether open source software is on the rise. We want to predict and explain on adoption, yeah, on a greater adoption for ICT for open source software. And one may decide to use certain theories which help to predict and explain for us to know whether something will be adopted or not. Let me even go further. Let us say we have let us say that these open source applications have just been implemented, and we don't have yet time to have a longitudinal research, maybe 5-year research, to find out if these systems have been fully adopted or not. But there are certain theories which can predict if they will be adopted or not. For example, theories like TAM, technology adoption model, and others. These provide certain principles or certain variables or certain assumptions about ICT adoption. Take an example. They will say women will adopt a system if they perceive it to be easy to use, and men will adopt a system if they perceive it to be useful to their everyday life. So these two assumptions can help you research and make a prediction on a certain large group of people. So that is so positivists will, for example, ask questions like, a positivist researcher in this field will ask questions like about a device or a system on things like, I easily find the future I want to find. And then they ask that to maybe 100 users. And from those 100 users, how many say strongly believe, for example, or believe that I easily find any future on this system? Another question may be, will say something like, I easily finish my tasks, maybe in uploading my assignment, or finding the assignment, or simple things like that, changing my settings. And you ask those simple, I easily find, and the person gives on a scale, on a given scale, whether they strongly believe or do not believe that is the case. So if you ask 100 people, and then you begin to tabulate, to measure how many are more agreeable than disagreeable in comparison. How many are more agreeable on this future, on this particular question, as opposed to this one? So therefore, they can make a prediction that this system will be adopted, can be easily adopted, because most users find it easy to use. So that is the positivist viewpoint. Okay. Now, phenomenology is the opposite. Yeah? We seek to understand. Okay? We seek to understand. We take it that each phenomena is unique. So unlike the positivist who was looking at maybe open source software and its adoptability, a researcher with a phenomenology philosophical outlook will say that no, for me, in my case, I think each instance of, let's say, a Moodle setup is unique. The way users in UMU view Moodle is not the same way users in Makerere view Moodle. And for me, I want to look at each instance uniquely. A private institution versus a public institution. And they will seek to understand the context of the setup in UMU and the context of the setup in Makerere University. They will look at different aspects of setup, a small university and a large university. Okay? A university with resources, a university with less resources, and one with greater resources. And they look at it from that perspective, and they want to say we seek to understand, we seek to the experience of each user in the different contexts. Okay? Another may say, I want to look at the user from a developing context to a developed context. Take an example, the experience of a user, let's say in South Africa or in Europe, is not the same as an experience of a user in Uganda. We are looking at different exposure to technology, people with different options, different internet speeds, and so on and so forth. Yeah? So the experiences differ. So the phenomenologists, yeah, will seek to understand further and to seek to understand people's different experiences. Now, when you look at the two perspectives, usually there is a clash between the two, where some may claim that this research is this research which looks at people's feelings and so on and so forth cannot be taken seriously. But however, and then also the positivist side, where they will say these are facts, these are the majority that are looking at this thing. Again, it points to what is it exactly we are trying to research about? What is the research question? How much is known about this topic that it warrants, it may not warrant me taking a positivist approach? Again, remember I gave you the example of COVID-19 when it first emerged, and COVID-19 when a lot of information had been known about it. Then in that situation, the question of when we're talking about the virus itself, when we know so much about it, then we begin the questions we ask are quite different. A researcher may be finding out the reaction of COVID-19 amongst, let's say, a Ugandan community which has experienced it since 2019 to date, is going to be quite different from a researcher, let's say, for example, who is going to find out COVID-19 which has attacked maybe an indigenous tribe in the Amazons. The Amazons are an area which accommodate certain communities which are completely isolated, and sometimes even when people are researching about them, they will even make sure they don't physically contact them, because these communities are so isolated, they have never experienced certain diseases. So imagine COVID-19 hits them for the first time. That the researcher will take a completely different approach because this is a fresh community which has been hit by COVID-19. So that researcher may want to look at it from a phenomenalist approach, as opposed to the positivist approach which one may take in a Ugandan context, which has had a lot of experience with COVID-19. Am I making sense?
Yes.
Yes, you are.
Yes. Let's move forward. So this marks our look at research philosophies, the two different philosophical approaches that we may take. Now, this then leads us to research approach. This was research philosophy, then leads us directly to research approach. Once one has understood or has picked an approach that they wish to take, then they are then led to, or rather the philosophical approach. It then leads to the research approach that one decides to take. Yep. Sorry? Is there someone who is not muted? Joanne. Joanne, could you kindly mute?
Sorry, madam.
Okay. Thank you. So now we come to the research approach. So the two philosophical outlooks lead directly to the research approach, how we intend to approach a particular research area. We have two approaches, the deductive and inductive. So inductive, it leans towards positivism, and that is deductive. Inductive leads to phenomenology. Yeah. So usually the deductive approach develops a theory and designs a strategy. Yeah. Let's discuss this in detail. If a theory is true, X will occur. Test X. If X does occur, it supports the theory. If X does not occur, it challenges the theory. Now, I gave you earlier the example of adoption. Yeah, technology adoption. Do you remember that example?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, we talked about adoption, and specifically it was about term, the technology adoption model. But there are other adoption models. There are quite a number of them. But the term is the one which quickly comes up front to mind. So term, like I said, talks about usability, and usefulness. These two aspects. The greater the usability, the higher the ability to, the higher the chances of being adapted. The greater the usefulness, the higher the chances of being adopted, and vice versa. Yeah. So if one takes term as a theory that is true, and then decides to predict, on whether open source technologies like Moodle will stand the test of time in institutions of higher learning, then the question is, now we want to test this out if it is true. and the person decides to carry out research based on this theory. If this theory is true and says, if X will occur, then we test X. If it turns out, if does occur, then it supports the theory. If it doesn't occur, then the theory is challenged. Yeah? That's where deductive approach starts with. Usually we start with a hypothesis. So a hypothesis is a statement which is creating an assumption or predicting the relationship between two concepts. Yeah. So for example, we have one here, very generic one, which talks about age and gross annual income. Maybe it says that the higher your age, as the age increases, so does the gross annual income. As one's age increases, so does the gross annual income. So the point is you are trying to prove or disprove this theory, this hypothesis, yeah, which emerged from a theory. So there must be a theory which predicts that as one grows, so does their income, so do their income levels. Is that necessarily true? Maybe, maybe not. So this sorry, I forgot to put my phone on silent. Let me just I'll put my phone on silent in a few minutes. So essentially, a hypothesis is this statement which is talking about a relationship between two concepts. So for example, when we go back to our term theory, we talked about usability and adoption. And then we went further. We went further and said, term goes further and makes a prediction and says, for women, specifically for women, the chances of adopting are higher if they find something easy to use. Okay? Then there's another assumption on usefulness. That in general, if something is found to be useful, it will be adopted. And then term goes further and says, if it's a man who is a user, the chances are higher to adopt if they find something useful to use. Now, this already we are creating a hypothesis. This is hypothesis 1. This is hypothesis 2. And one can decide to do their research to find out if this is necessarily true with open source software or with any other ICT. Okay? So it is important for us to first of all have that clear understanding of a hypothesis and a deductive approach in research. So far, are we making sense?
Yes, doctor.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So let's move further. So the deductive approach starts from a theory, from which theory we formulate a hypothesis. From that hypothesis, as we carry out research, we observe. We observe facts. So they should be observable facts, something quantifiable. And once we come up with the observable facts, then the results either confirm or challenge the theory. So if they confirm, if they challenge the theory, we go back to refining our theory if it is challenged. But if it doesn't, we can confirm and state that yes, the theory is actually true or false. Then we come to induction or inductive approach. Here we are building theory, while the other one is being drawn from theory. This one is building on theory. Okay? You start with a question. Here is an example. What is the experience of working at a particular farm? By the time someone asks such a question, it means there is little or nothing known about what the experience is of people working in a particular farm. Let us talk about maybe specifically in banks. Okay? Maybe research has not been done on what people experience as they work in banks. You may find that a lot of research has been done and even a theory has been developed talking about stress levels or affluent levels or high income levels. They could be, that could be the perspective. But essentially, if someone is asking a what question, it means there's little experience, there's little knowledge of what people perceive as they work in a particular farm. So in that case, we would decide to go and, let us say, interview employees of a particular farm and see how they feel about certain issues. In a bank, if it's a research, let's say in a bank, you'd want to find out, oh, how do people feel about the working hours? How do they feel about their salary scale? How do they feel about the risks that are involved in working in a banking sector? And so on and so forth. So you'd sit down and interview and gain people's experiences. Now, over time, as certain things begin to emerge, certain themes, we refer to them as themes. As themes begin to emerge, these themes are then used to develop theory. So, for example, as you interview, people may begin to talk about maybe salary. Yeah? And people maybe begin to talk about stress levels. These are the themes that are developing as you do more and more research on banks, as you interview more and more people. Okay? Then there could be risks involved, especially maybe on things like shortages, on robbery, because banks, I imagine banks are a huge target in terms of on thefts, then maybe, or maybe even things like fraud and things like that. Fake money, and those are the risks that may be involved. So these are the themes that would emerge. And these themes later on, one can develop theory out of them. Maybe risks involved is related to stress levels. Salary may be related to social strata. Yeah. So you may find people who work in banks belong to a particular, maybe middle income levels, or they are urban dwellers, and you rarely find someone who works in a bank living in a rural area or something like that. So it would automatically develop theories, which theories point to relationships between concepts. But it started with a what question. So induction or inductive research is a theory builder, while deductive is a theory tester. Do I make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I really hope so. So in inductive research, we say human beings interpret their world. They have consciousness. So you really, in inductive approach, we don't just want to get someone ticking off a box, yes, no, and so on and so forth. But you really want to get the feeling and perspective of an individual and what their context brings out, what their context speaks about, or how they relate with their context. And you really want to get that feeling. It would be very different. Inductive research would be very different. Let's say when a researcher is finding out about maybe bank employees and how their experience with working in a bank, it's quite different from maybe a researcher who is trying to find out people who are in a certain age bracket and their expenditure. Yeah, expenditure on mobile phones, expenditure on groceries. So that would be very quantitative in nature. But if someone is talking to someone working in a bank, you really want to get their experience of what it means to work in a bank. How does that affect them morally? How does that, how do they feel about it? How does that affect their stress levels? What has it led to, and so on. Someone is really going in depth in the research. Now, normally we talk about that when we want to, here we'll talk about context matters and the fact that it's so you start from observation. So from observation, you build patterns, and then from the patterns, we come up with tentative hypothesis, and finally theory. So you see, it is a reverse of the deductive. Now, normally with inductive research, because you're carrying out observation, you normally start with a small research area because you're going deep. You're going deep. Whereas in deductive approach, normally it is about how wide we go. How wide we are going. Because we're dealing with something that has already been tested, but we're testing it further. So it's how wide we go. With inductive, it is how deep we go. How deep we go with the research. Any questions so far? Do we have any questions so far?
Doctor,
Yes, please.
maybe this is Mlera. I would wish you refer, I want you to relate. I wish that you relate inductive research with the qualitative. It is always assumed that when you're handling inductive research, you are like, but I really mix those things, Doctor.
Yes, actually, everything I'm saying, I'm indirectly trying to point to both quantitative and qualitative. You notice, we said with inductive research, we are proving something. And to prove something, we're asking how many have done this, how many have not done this. Very much quantitative in nature. Inductive, if we're gaining experience and we're saying it is how deep, we're basically talking about qualitative research. It's just that I haven't brought out the terms because later on we're going to talk about them, but essentially that's what we are talking about. Inductive research is pointing towards qualitative research, how deep we're going, and because with qualitative, we're basically asking what it is little known about something, and we want to get to know more. We want to know more about it. Then, and because we want to get know more about it, we go deep. We go really deep in understanding. I don't know if you understand that point. Then with the inductive, with deductive research, we already know something. We already know quite a bit. We're actually testing. So it's how wide we go. Something measurable. We are counting something measurable. I don't know if I have clarified that point.
Yeah, I think, Doctor, you're clear, madam.
Okay. Now the two approaches sometimes can be quite worrying in nature.
Doctor, I have a question.
Yes, please, David.
Where do there is something I wanted you to highlight about. There is scientific research and then the research that fall under social science. How do we now differentiate between under inductive and then deductive approaches?
Now, one thing we must make clear, all research is scientific, whether it is social research, social sciences, it is all research is scientific. Why? Because you're actually following a method, a scientific method in how you identify a problem, how you approach it, how you decide to approach it, how you select your research method, and how you implement it. So all research is scientific. There is, I don't think we can say that there is research which is non-scientific and so on and so forth. When sometimes people talk about, let me bring out, let me see if I can bring a whiteboard. Sorry. Let me first stop sharing and see if I can demonstrate using a whiteboard. Where is a whiteboard here? Oh, I'm not seeing whiteboard, nothing. Okay. It's still loading. Let's first give it a minute. I think this, let me first see if how do I get out of this? Okay, are we seeing the whiteboard?
X.
Can you see the whiteboard?
Yes, doctor.
Yes.
You can see it, eh?
Yes.
Let me use the classic whiteboard. I think it's a bit better. Okay, let us first of all understand what social science research is. If I just quickly Google this social science research, let me just quickly Google it, and you can also do so and see. So here I'm saying something, says social science research publishes papers devoted to quantitative social science research and methodology. Yeah. So normally, it looks at quantitative research and methodology, but I want to say also social science research can also use qualitative methodology. Now, if so, we have one side here, social science. Yeah. Oh, let me just call it SS. Then you have also on this side what people would like to refer to as scientific research. So most of the time, the assumption here is that this is something like laboratory experiments. Okay, so typically what would come to mind with this is something like, let's say, the COVID-19 researchers, those who are looking specifically at the virus itself, those scientists who were looking under the microscope and studying this and studying that and so on and so forth. So this would be, that would be in that category where we believe this is the scientific research. That when you come to the social scientist is looking at phenomenology within a society, phenomena within a society. Okay. So this could be someone looking at income levels, someone, let's say, looking at income levels, someone who is looking at an economist, yeah, economic researchers. Economists may be looking at things like GDP and so on and so forth. This would fall in this category. Okay. Now, as us as ICT students, where would we lie? I'd say we lie in between. Yeah, we lie in between. So take an example. If you had a student or a researcher who has implemented an ICT artifact, okay, an ICT artifact, for example, a mobile app, and decides to first do research using laboratory experiments, okay? Decides to do research using laboratory experiments. Did I give you articles? I think I gave you articles, yeah? For your first assignment.
Yes, doctor.
Yes, and
Yes,
one
yes.
of you, one group got something where they used a laboratory experiment, not so?
Yes, doctor.
Yeah, but there were human subjects part of it. There were human subjects. This is very much unlike the COVID-19, let's say the COVID-19 scientists who are looking under a microscope, but you can't study, your participants can't be in a laboratory and you're studying certain reactions from them. I remember one time I was part of a project called Avoir, which was developing an e-learning system, an open source e-learning system. And I remember at one point we were part of the participants where we were monitoring the system. We were, sorry, not monitoring, but we were asked to use the system. And as we were using it, the screen was recording our movements to see how easily we would find a certain future, how easily we could do this and do that. And that was all laboratory experiments. Yeah. Take also another perspective. I gave you the example of someone researching on using term, maybe, and saying, I'm going to research Moodle and look at usability and usefulness. Yeah, usability and usefulness on the gender perspective. This one, a person who gives out a questionnaire, with these kinds of questions that are testing usability and usefulness is falling more or less on this side, but we're looking at adoption, which is an ICT perspective, but it's falling on the social science side. So for me, I would say we as ICT people, we fall on both sides. Yeah, we fall on both sides. It can be, you can research something as a laboratory experiment, and you can research it as a social, falling more or less on the social science side. Then we do have another which falls in between, specifically in between. And I think this is where most of our research as ICT comes in, realism. Okay? Where we are picking, where one may pick both from the deductive and deductive and inductive from both, and this is preempting our next slide where we decide to mix both sides, deductive and inductive. And you find an individual designs an artifact, and this artifact may be a system or a framework for our ICT students. Sorry, let me move this back. Any kind of artifact. So somebody designs an artifact and places it in a context. Okay? Places it in a context with a particular research question. There is an assumption that this artifact is going to bring about improved processes. Okay? So when I implement it in this context, my question is, does it bring about, is there an effect on processes? Let this be processes in short. Is there an effect on processes? And I may decide to interview some people. I may decide to observe. And I may decide to issue a questionnaire to those who have observed this artifact. So here I have combined both approaches, deductive and inductive, to observe this artifact, to answer whether it has brought about improved processes, business processes. Again, it could be a model, a framework, or it could be an actual system, a mobile application, a system that has been implemented. I have introduced realism. This is a very messed up whiteboard, but I don't know if I'm making any sense.
Yes, you do.
Okay, let us go back to our slides. And talking about combining, which was what we preempted, realism. Combining, it may be advantageous to combine methods. Now, how do we choose whether we're going quantitative or qualitative? This I've been talking about in bits and pieces. If there's a wealth of material from which it is easy to define a hypothesis, then the deductive approach makes sense. If the field is new and you need to generate data so that you can develop themes, then the inductive approach is the best. Okay? Those are two principles you need to bear in mind. A wealth of material. For example, we talked about adoption. Adoption, really, there's been a lot of research done on ICT or artifact adoption. There's been a lot of research that has been done. That is why we have a number of theories that talk about adoption. And because there's that wealth of material, we can easily define a hypothesis which can be tested. But when there is little data on a particular topic, then we may decide to go inductive. I'll give you an example from my research, which was ICT based and also inductive in nature. I was doing research on sustainability of ICT4D artifacts. So I don't know if you've ever heard of ICT4D artifacts.
No, doctor.
Okay.
No.
We basically know ICT, information communication technology. Now, when these artifacts, ICTs, are placed into a developing context with the aim of bringing about development, that means coming from poverty into wealth, then it is referred to as an ICT4D. So take an example, a lot of schools, especially schools in rural areas or in developing areas, have been equipped with computers. Okay, then they are referred to as those computers are referred to as ICT4D. I don't know if there may be some of you who are in the healthcare sector, specifically in government, in the Ministry of Health and so on and so forth. Those who are there, you've seen situations where certain applications are implemented for the sake of improving record keeping or reporting, for the sake of improving reporting in the healthcare system. I don't know if there's anyone in healthcare. Is there anyone in healthcare, specifically Ministry of Health, anyone in that sector? Is there anyone in that sector? No? Okay. Let me just give a background, because this is a sector that I know something about. So when we look at the Uganda's healthcare system, we have what we call public health facilities, private. We have the private not-for-profit. So this is where you find the health facilities that are under religious institutions, for example, those under the Catholic medical health system, the Protestant medical health system, and then Islamic. So hospitals like Chibuli Hospital, Mengo Hospital, those are private not-for-profit. So the public hospitals would be Mulago Hospital, the likes of Mulago Hospital, and so on and so forth. Then you have the purely private. The purely private would be something like IHK, Bethany, and so on and so forth. Those are the purely private. So in the healthcare system, the public hospitals work very well with the private not-for-profit. These two normally work in hand. They also work with private hospitals, but normally the public and private not-for-profit work very well together. And they usually have the very same agenda. Preventive, they first start with preventive, curative. I think it's preventive and then curative. And the purely private don't usually go in preventive. They usually go straight for preventive healthcare. So in the public hospitals and private not-for-profit, they really depend a lot on reporting. So I'll give you an example. Because of the preventive part, private not-for-profit and public hospitals depend on what we call VHTs, community healthcare workers, those who will go from home to home, maybe recording the new births, those who will go from home to home teaching, telling people to sleep under mosquito nets, to make sure they have a place for latrines are built, or a place where you wash your utensils and hang them. You will not find a healthcare worker coming from a purely private hospital doing something like that. Now, as they do that, they also make reports, okay? They write them in books, in these huge books. So over time, they've also developed mobile applications to help faster reporting, so that a healthcare worker maybe will report that, oh, there've been this number of births in my village. Another one will report, oh, I've treated this number of cases of malaria in children, or I've referred this number of cases of children under 5 who are sick to a higher healthcare facility. So that reporting structure. So when an application like that is developed and placed into such a context, it's referred to as an ICT4D, an ICT4 development. Have we understood what ICT4Ds are?
Yes, doctor.
Okay. So
Yes.
key point here is that these ICT for Ds, one of the things that was reported by the time I was doing the research was that we have sustainability challenges. We have quite a number of sustainability challenges. And then there were some propositions being put forward. They were saying, although there had been some research which had been done, but they were proposing that one of the reasons why we don't know much about sustainability, there was some information, but they were saying one of the reasons we lack sustainability is, one, there is lack of rigorous research, meaning most of the time when an ICT for D is implemented, it comes with hype, from the donors. The donors are saying this and that about this, but nothing has been substantiated. That's one. Two, there's lack of evaluation. So because there was no research on those two, my research was basically new. Basically new in this area. So I said, let my research be inductive in nature and see what themes would emerge. And from those themes, I developed a model. Okay? I designed a model basing on those themes, basically talking about sustainability, designing a sustainable mHealth application. So that was because it was new, because there were just propositions coming up, people saying this needs to be done, this needs to be done, and it hadn't been done. Okay? And because it hadn't been done and my research was new, I took a very much an inductive approach where I was coming up with themes from a highly qualitative research. So from what was asked earlier, I think who is it that asked earlier? Sorry, I forget. Let me just look at the participants. If I look at the name, I'll remember. It was a lady who asked that question. It was Winfred. So Winfred, my research was highly qualitative in nature. Okay, highly qualitative in nature. So this is where I want to differentiate the two on the practical side of things. Now, can somebody combine, can someone say, well, many times our research has both. There is some data, but at the same time, and especially for someone who wants to do a cross-sectional research, research within time, for most of us, we are going to design artifacts. That means when we're designing artifacts, we're either building a system, an application, or we're going to design a framework. So in that case, you're not going, you'll say, I'm not going to submit a questionnaire. I'm not going to submit a questionnaire that is to over 100 people on a framework. But I can combine the two. I can do a survey and at the same time also do interviews. Okay? One, the questionnaire, doing a survey will take a short time. But I don't have enough number of people, and I can't go submitting this to over 100 people. As a master's student, it's out of my budget. I cannot afford it. So I would suggest that let me focus on a few people. Let me give to a few people, but at the same time also do interviews. But also inductive research is labor intensive. So I'll give you an example. My research, because it was inductive and it was using ethnography. Ethnography is a research method. We shall talk about it later. Ethnography needs that you spend a good amount of time with the community. So I spent 2 years with the community. Now, for you at master's level, you don't have that time. 2 years is the amount of time you actually do your research itself. Your entire program. So you're not going to do 2 years. Okay. So the question is, what do I do? How can I combine? So I can combine these two approaches, inductive and deductive. And this is where we shall talk about, later on, we are going to talk about realism. Okay? Realism, we shall talk about it later, where we combine the two, where someone will say, I'm going to design an artifact. I'll design it maybe on paper. On paper meaning I do literature review, come up with the features, design the artifact, whether the artifact is a framework, a model, or a system, or an application, implement it in a context. Yeah? Implement this artifact in a context. Now, in this context, I will administer questionnaires, asking people of their experience of this artifact, what do they perceive of it? And at the same time, I will also carry out interviews. Okay? To get a further understanding on the experience. And I will also observe the context as the artifact is introduced. How does the context behave? What are the things lacking, for example, to support the artifact? Attitude, readiness, I would observe all these things, and using all these tools, these different tools, I come up with a wealth of information that otherwise that I am at the moment as a master's student unable to go and do if I'm just doing purely inductive or purely deductive. Are we making sense?
Yes, doctor.
Yes, doctor, we are making sense.
Okay.
Doctor, I have a question.
Yes, please.
I don't know if I'm going to take you back, but I'm trying to reconcile my understanding about philosophies, then the approach. Actually, I have read this for some time, over 3 times, but I want to help me understand what is the relationship between the approach. When do you choose? What factor do you base on to get the philosophy, and what is the relationship between the philosophy and then the approach that you use, inductive, deductive, or mixed? But because in the union, the research process union, the philosophy first, then you go to the process, to the approach. So what is the relationship there, and what factor do you base on to go with which philosophy, and then dig into the approaches?
Okay. Now, let's come back to this particular page. When we talk about if there is a wealth of material from which it is easy to define a hypothesis, then choose deductive. If the field is new and you need to generate data and reflect on themes, then the choice is inductive. Those are the two most basic ways you can choose whether you're going to go deductive or inductive. Okay? And I gave you the example of if, let's say, you're doing research on adoption. Okay? Now, adoption of any artifact, there's been a lot of research done. A lot of research as far as adoption is concerned. I've been actually repeating, or rather, let me just voice a number of theories that have been developed as far as but let me even just Google this adoption theories. I mentioned one of them, term. There's been a lot of theories that have been developed. Let me see if I can just speak. Excuse me. Let me see if I can just pick one article here. Okay, theories here we have diffusion theory, innovative decision process, individual innovative theory, rate of adoption, term is one of them, theory of reasoned action, theory of perceived attribute, theory of planned behavior. See, there are so many theories that talk about adoption. So in other words, there's a wealth of material if someone is looking at adoption of a particular artifact, be it a framework or a system, or there's a wealth of information. Now, there are other things which are quite new. I'll give you an example. Most of you, are, especially in ICT, you're going to meet something called enterprise architecture. You're going to meet something called enterprise architecture. This is relatively new in Africa and specifically in Uganda. One can decide to say, I'm going to research on this and use an inductive approach. If you went to many organizations and find out how many have implemented enterprise architecture, you'll find that's barely there. So one can decide to say, I'm going to take an inductive approach. I don't know if I've answered your question. Have I answered your question? On how we could choose which approach to take. We shall go further when we talk about research questions. When you find yourself with a research question saying, what is? This one is talking about exploration. Exploration is basically saying there's little known we want to explore. If a question starts with how, maybe how does open source software affect adoption? This one is already referring to a relationship, a causal relationship, causal. And this one is already making an assumption. So this one is leaning towards deductive. So even your research question, the way it is phrased, points to. Have I answered your question? Arthur, you have a question?
Yes, doctor. Just to confirm that I've understood you correctly. When you talk of, for example, the example you gave of adoption theories. So as long as there is a wealth of information regarding the subject in which my research is based, even though for that particular maybe piece of software or artifact that it's not directly to the artifact, but then there is a wealth of information regarding the theory, then I can choose deductive. Even though there is no specific content research that has been done for that particular software. For example, if someone chose to maybe introduce e-banking on WhatsApp and wanted to like evaluate whether it would be adopted, they don't have to like have someone who has done it before. As long as there is information about the adoption of these technologies in general, then they can choose deductive. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Well, thank you, doctor.
You're welcome. And then did we understand when we can combine the two approaches?
Yes,
did we understand? Okay, I hope it's the same for everyone. So we're going to look at research strategies. I would advise this one, we first skip it. Research strategies are essentially the methods, the research methods like case study. For us in ICT, because we're designing artifacts, these two, design science and action design science, will be very instrumental. But I'd suggest we skip it and we shall talk about it later. We shall talk about some of these later in detail. Is that okay? There's a separate lecture on that.
Doctor.
Yes, please.
Maybe before you go further, there is this other question that I wanted to bring to our attention. I just need clarity and maybe guidance. When they talk of research methodologies, and then they basically come out and bring out qualitative and quantitative. That we have approaches.
So
you realize that when I'm saying whenever they ask for methodologies, for example, in research, you realize that I imagine that basically would look at qualitative and quantitative. But again, those two methodologies are never had. Instead, we talk about the approaches. And so I wonder, why should we have them broadened as research methodologies, yet again we go for the approaches? I don't understand that.
Now there are research methods and then there are research approaches. Those are not the same thing. Okay. Now I've just skipped the methods because I wanted us to discuss them in detail. I wanted us to have them as a separate lecture when we look at them in detail. What we've been talking about are approaches. Qualitative is an inductive approach is a qualitative approach, or a leaning towards qualitative research. Now, under the qualitative research, I can decide to use the research method case study. Winfred, have you got that?
Doctor, I'm following, Doctor.
Yes. So if I am taking, I want to lean towards qualitative, I will decide to use the research method case study. Okay. Then I can also decide to use the research method ethnography. Those two, case study and ethnography, are research methods under the qualitative approach. I can decide to use a deductive or quantitative approach, and under that, I use the research method survey, or I use the research method laboratory experiments. Those two research methods are research methods under the deductive approach. Now, however, Winfred, it's also possible to combine some of these. I can decide to use a survey under a qualitative approach. Let me repeat that. I can decide to use a survey research method under a qualitative approach. I will give you an example. My research was largely qualitative in nature, meaning I did a lot of group discussions, I did observations, I did ethnography because I spent time with this community 2 years. I also did interviews. This was my qualitative approach. But, however, I decided to employ, number one, a survey. I administered a questionnaire to 50 VHT or community health workers in one village and 50 community health workers in another village. And the purpose I did that, the reason I did that was to make sure that the themes I picked out during my observations, during my interviews, could also be identified with many other community health workers. So in other words, it is called triangulation, just to validate. It was to validate my findings that I identified during the qualitative research tools. That was one. Two, I also identified another theme during my qualitative approach. That was, I identified that during that time, 2016, a number of community health workers were mobile phone illiterate. During interviews and group discussions, I discovered that. Now, however, what I did was I went to 12 villages where we were carrying out training of using mobile phones, and I administered an objective style test. Before and after. Before was primarily to determine mobile literacy. So the objective style question was used as a quantitative tool to ascertain what I had discovered during the qualitative side. So it was again to triangulate and validate my results. Winfred, I hope I don't know if I'm making sense.
Yes, doctor, I'm following.
Okay. So I hope others have picked from Winfred's question. Eh? We do have the
Yes,
approaches.
doctor.
Yeah, the approaches. Then we have research methods underneath them. There are those which fall more to the qualitative side and others which fall more to the quantitative side. So let us look at, now that we've skipped research methods, let's look at time horizon. Yeah. In cross-sectional studies, we collect data at a particular point in time. So for example, you are going to do research. Most of you are going to do your research probably within the period of 2025, maybe 2025 to 2026. Just within that, maybe within a 6-month period or something like that. Eh? That is cross-sectional research. It happens within a particular point in time. You realize when I was telling you some of the data I picked, I said that was as of 2016. Now things have changed. If someone was to go and do research on the same topic 2024, things have changed. Okay? Then longitudinal research is when you collect data at a number of points in time. So I'll give you an example. There's a research that was done in UK. I think it was done following, as they picked a number of children, and they picked them from a certain, maybe from 0 years to 5 years. And in that time, they kept coming and collecting data on a set of children. That is longitudinal research that takes over a period of 5 years. Okay? Another kind of longitudinal research, and this you normally find with social scientists, I've seen them do this. When they decide to say they get secondary data, maybe from Uganda Bureau of Statistics, someone wants to look at income levels from maybe in 1968, maybe they again pick in 1978, then maybe in 1988, then 1998, then maybe 2018. Okay? That is longitudinal research, but they are picking from secondary data. Do you get the difference between the two?
Yes, doctor, we do. However, maybe if I may ask doctor.
Yes, please.
Hello.
Yes, please go ahead.
Oh, maybe if I may ask doctor, what type of research would this be when you are trying to look at the impact of ICT? Impact of ICT vis-a-vis the environmental sustainability. What type of research would that be, doctor?
Again, for that, it depends on you the researcher. Do you want, what type of research do you want, what method? For example, someone might say, I want to do a laboratory research and get certain elements and studies them and their impact, maybe what it emits in the environment. That is cross-sectional. It is within a specific period of time. Another person will say, I want to look at how many computers are dumped, maybe in the KCCA dumping sites. That kind of thing, eh? That one would be cross-sectional. If it is longitudinal, if another person can decide to say, I want to do a longitudinal research on impact on the environment, and they will start from, a person will commission a study that starts from 2024, then again does it, looks at several variables on the environment, and then does it again in the next 5 years, then in the next another 5 years, and then another. That is longitudinal. So Winfred, it all depends on you, the researcher, what it is you're embarking on. So the impact can be measured in any format, in any approach, and in different perspectives. So the impact can be done longitudinally or cross-sectionally, depending on the researcher. Have I answered your question?
Yes, doctor, you have.
Okay. Now, a key point to note is if our research is exploratory, descriptive, or explanatory. This again points to our research being deductive, inductive. Is my research exploratory? So exploratory means very little is known about this research. For example, the research I was doing was more or less exploratory because the all literature was saying there was little known, research was not rigorous, so there needed to be method applied. And then 2, it needed to evaluate. So my research applying these 2 was more or less exploratory. Then there's research that is descriptive. So descriptive means we do know something, but we want to get a more generic picture, a greater description of this of research. Then there is such research being explanatory or analytical. So exploratory is highly inductive. Highly inductive. Usually descriptive combines the 2. Yeah? Descriptive combines the 2. Then explanatory is deductive in nature. So deductive in nature. So again, the research question will guide you. Questions like what? These questions like how. We shall talk about research questions in a separate lecture. Okay? And they'll give you more detail, more explanation on whether your research may be explanatory, descriptive, or exploratory. So everything depends on the goal and purpose of the research. Let's go. So just to go into detail, the explanatory study finds out what is happening. You seek new insight, you ask questions, assess the phenomena in a new light, meaning there is little known about something. 3 ways to conduct exploratory research. You first start with searching literature. So literature, if it depends on, so again, I'll go back to my research. When I found that ICT 4D researchers were calling for rigorous research and evaluation. So first thing I did was, let me go into literature and find out, because my research was on mHealth. So I said, what research has been done on mHealth? And majority of the publications, what had been done was they were finding out on impact on. So for example, most of the research on mHealth was the applications on mHealth were focusing on adherence to treatment. That was at that time, adherence to treatment. So they were implementing mHealth applications to ensure that TB patients adhere to their treatments. Patients who are on HIV treatment are adhering to their treatments. And most research was trying to find out impact. Was there greater adherence because of the application? And most of them were saying yes. But nothing was being talked about sustainability or method or evaluation. So from that, literature was pointing out that there was very little on that particular topic, as far as rigorous, rather method application and method and evaluation. That's what literature was showing, that there was very little. There was just literature on impact. So in that case, my research was leaning towards it was an exploratory study, therefore qualitative in nature. Okay? So here, the tip is keep things flexible and adaptable. You cannot have any possible prediction. Where, like in adoption, we would predict. In that case, you cannot have any prediction. You're going out to explore, and you're going to find themes and report on those themes. Yeah? So the research will give you direction. Unlike explanatory and analytical research, where you're going to have a prediction on a possible outcome. Sorry, as you're typing this, it gets, so you start with a very broad focus and then narrow down as you pick more data. So descriptive, you're portraying an accurate picture of persons or events or a situation. So for example, one may decide to have a descriptive research on the state of open source software in e-learning in developing countries, specifically Uganda. And they decide to do a descriptive report on the state of affairs. How many universities are using open source? Of that open source, how much of it is on e-learning? And of e-learning, how much of it, how far has it gone? How far are they using it? Are they using it as a repository, or are they actually using it for teaching and learning? They actually give a description of what is the state of affairs in Ugandan universities. Yeah. So descriptive research can be an extension of exploratory research. Okay, it can be it builds on. So it gives a clear picture of a phenomena, whereas exploratory is discovering it. Descriptive is giving a clearer picture. Okay? Is that okay? Do we understand this point so far?
Almost.
Okay. And I'm sure as you're asking, you may be asking yourself a question that, really, where will my research fall? Eh? Don't worry about that now. You will find out as you do your research. Eh? We don't have the clear answers right now. Then explanatory.
Doctor, I have a question.
Yes, please, Dennis.
Hello, Doctor.
Yes, please.
Yes, let's look at your research.
Mm-hmm.
You said it was more of qualitative.
Yes, please.
So assuming you needed to go back into development and maybe based off the findings obtained from that you were in for 2 years, that required some improvements on M-Health application, and therefore that you needed to do some enhancements, which would take you to the lab. So would that be considered as a combined kind of research?
Yes. Now for you, okay, you're talking about someone building onto the research I did.
Yes, and they also need to maybe touch the technology.
The technology side, eh?
Yes.
Yes. Someone can decide to do that, and then this, say, okay, maybe this research focused on this particular mHealth application, and maybe the researcher discovered this, and based on these discoveries, another researcher says, I want to improve on this application based on the recommendations this particular researcher did, and then they go and test it out in the lab. That is very okay, and it's building on. Dennis, I think, have I answered your question?
Yes, please. Thank you.
So then we have explanatory studies. So these studies will establish causal relationships. So remember when we talked about term, those are typical causal relationships. Yeah. Here we go back to the issue of gross income and age. Yeah, where someone maybe puts up a hypothesis that the older you grow, the higher the income levels, the income levels begin to grow, as this graph is showing you. Yeah, so this causal relationship insinuates that age is related to increased age is related to increased income. Okay, so that is insinuating a causal relationship. Okay, so I think that one should be clear. Is that one okay? So this research is typically quantitative in nature, and I gave you an example of where ICT can be implemented, and especially in adoption. Adoption is one area where a lot of research has been done. So that is also an area that you can explore. We have the multi-method approach. So here we are trying to combine qualitative and quantitative, deductive and inductive. So here you have somebody deciding to use interviews, like the exploratory part, then we'll decide to also administer a questionnaire. Okay, so the questionnaire may be to support the interviews. I gave you the example where I used the questionnaire to triangulate my findings, to validate my findings. So again, it depends, the multiple method approach or mixed method approach. It depends again on your question. It doesn't mean that it's always the best approach, but it depends really much on your question. And when we look at research questions, we shall explore this in detail. So the multi-method approach is normally used for triangulation, for one to validate their findings. That I discovered these themes during my interviews, and I want to validate them with more respondents faster. Also, the other way around, even for the quantitative, if you may have, one may let me give you an example. Again, both of you, for the IS students, you have an article. You have an article which is talking about. What is it? Multisensory hedonic research, which is laboratory. Within that questionnaire, within that paper, they also talk about, they carried out some laboratory experiments, but also asked the participants questions to talk about their experience. So that is typically a quantitative approach, and somebody supporting their quantitative findings with questions further to explain further. Let's say, for example, if we are doing a research on adoption, and we decided to administer a questionnaire based on term, and the researcher can decide to follow up those questions using interviews with a few of the respondents, just to give further insight on how they perceived the usefulness of a particular system. So that is typically triangulation, where we use the mixed method approach to validate our findings. Do we understand so far?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So we want to talk about credibility of research findings. We consider our supervisor, consider your audience, yeah? When you're writing your research, it's not about your supervisor, it's about you and you making a communication. So clarity is very important. It's you writing, it's you communicating something. So clarity is very important. As you write, the very good thing is you have the guidance of your supervisor. And most of the time, your supervisor asks questions. You write something and your supervisor asks questions. The purpose of your supervisor asking questions is basically telling you that what you've communicated, you probably haven't communicated it well. You need to be maybe a little bit more intentional with your communication. Two, your supervisor, when most of the time your supervisor is asking questions, they're considering the first and second reader. Your supervisor doesn't, especially at master's level, your supervisor doesn't mark your work. It's another reader. So the job of your supervisor is to make sure that your communication is clear for both your first and second reader and your external examiner. Then when you're writing, it depends on where you're going to publish your work. If it is a published article, scholarly article, and you know you're targeting specific journals, you look at their format and what they're asking for, okay? But if you're publishing for a dissertation for UMU, for example, take note to find out what an UMU dissertation typically looks like. The faculty of the Department of Computer Science and IT master's level, what do they normally look out for? So you follow that format, yeah, to make things easy for you. Others publish in terms of a sponsor, especially when you're looking for grants. But for us in this particular case, let us look at in this particular area, okay? Look at what UMU recommends. Two, look at the expectations of the department, of the Faculty of Science specifically, expectations, specifically the departments, the Department of Computer Science and IS. Yeah, what are the expectations? When we are looking at credibility of research findings, there are questions that are going to be asked. Here, let me talk about reliability. Now, I'll give you a practical example. There was research done several years back. This research that was done said, put up a proposition saying homosexuality is embedded in DNA, meaning one is born a homosexual or one is born inclined towards homosexuality, and it is predetermined in DNA. Now, those researchers published their findings. Now, when they published their findings, other researchers replicated that research. That is where this thing comes. Will the results be the same in other occasions? So when those researchers replicated that research, the results were negative. In other words, the results from other researchers said, no, homosexuality is not determined by DNA. Otherwise, if it were true, all the other research would have come out positive, showing that yes, for sure, it is DNA determines homosexuality. Okay? So one of the reasons we are looking for reliability in our findings is to move as close as possible to saying that this research, when we do triangulation and validation, we are trying to validate our findings to say, this was tested using another tool and it was found to be true. So most likely, even when we're reporting, we say most likely this is a true finding. It's a true theme that you'll find in another context. Yeah? So when we publish, another researcher is trying to see if the observations will be the same. Yeah? And it talks about the transparency of our raw data. So this is what we talk about reliability and validation of data. 3, we are trying to generalize as much as possible. Generalizability of our findings. We're trying to generalize as much as possible. So let me give you an example. I was doing research, my research was qualitative in nature. However, I started from exploring the domain. So I first started literature review looking at poverty. Poverty meant low income levels. Poverty meant some people may have mobile phones, others may not have. Poverty meant illiteracy. That was from literature. Now, when I went into my case study, I found literacy also had a relationship to mobile literacy. Okay? Reading and writing had a relationship to mobile literacy. So I unearthed mobile illiteracy. So that, to a certain point, I could generalize my findings to a certain extent. Okay? Most of the times you find people say qualitative data you can't generalize because it is in a particular context, you're getting perspectives. But up to a certain point, you can generalize, especially if you relate it to other research settings. Then the other thing was I related my case study to other case studies showing that poverty levels were the same in Nindye, Nkozi area as maybe another village in Gulu. We had the same poverty levels, the same literacy levels, and so on and so forth. That was making it generalizable. Okay, that's where we actually go to describe our case study area. In case you're doing research on a case study, we describe our case study area and relate it to others. This is another way we give credibility to our research findings. Do we understand each other so far? On reliability and validity?
Yes, I do understand it.
Okay.
Doctor, kindly throw more light on generalizability.
Okay. Let me come back. Let me come specifically to this slide, which is it's referred to as external validity. Now, most of our research is going to be context-based at master's level, most of our research. Now, this is very much different when, let us say, it's not very different, but even in quantitative research. Let us say one of you wants is doing research on maybe you're doing research on you're implementing a mobile application in a banking sector. in a context within a banking sector. And you want to look at possibilities of adoption. Okay? But you want to implement it maybe for customers of Centenary Bank. Okay? You're looking at customers of Centenary Bank. Now there are other banks. What do? First and foremost, you first provide, you as a researcher, you provide a description of a typical, you provide a description from literature of a typical client of a bank. So from literature, what would literature describe as a client of a bank, specifically in Uganda? In other words, what part of Uganda's population banks, has the capacity to bank? Their revenues, their incomes, what section of the population? And you'd give a description of that from literature. Maybe literature points out that most of the time these are the employed, either self-employed or formally employed. These are the employed. These are adults. They should have some level of literacy, meaning they can read and write. And then you go ahead and give a description of, relate them to your case study area of Centenary Bank. Centenary Bank is a bank in Uganda, and this is a profile of its clients. And this profile related to the typical Ugandan who will bank in a bank, in the banking sector. So now, by already doing that, you're basically saying my findings, whether they are qualitative or quantitative, will be relatable to any client in Uganda. Meaning, if I put this mobile application within Centenary Bank, and begin to determine adoption, meaning if I take the same in Stanbic Bank with the clients of Stanbic Bank, I should expect the same behavior. I can generalize. Have you understood that point on generalizability?
Yes, doctor.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So a particular case can be related to others. Now, in deductive research, you will find they will talk about things like sampling. They'll talk about things like sampling. What do they mean when they talk about sampling? Let us say you want to do research on alcohol abuse among the youth, and you want to administer a questionnaire among the youth in Uganda. Now, if you calculate the total number of youth in Uganda, since Uganda is a young, you may find there may be, is a young, the youth may be 30 million if we are 40 million. There may be 30 million. You're not going to administer a questionnaire to all of them. First of all, among the youth, you will determine what are the age groups. The youth may be from maybe 16 maybe to 20, maybe 25 to Now, in this age group, you say, how many are the total? Then you say, from that, I'll pick this sample, then this sample, and that sample. Then say, from this sample, I'll say, I'll pick this from Gulu, from here, from here. So in other words, you're picking just from a few sections, but that section is representative of all the youth in Uganda. That's also generalizability. Is that okay? Is that understood?
Yes, Doctor.
Okay.
Yes, that's clear.
Okay. We come to the area of ethics in research. Now, this one we shall also cover in detail, but the ethical part of research is that we are dealing with subjects, people, respondents, okay? Now, ethics refers to fairness. Right and wrong. There is a wrong way to deal with a respondent. There's a right way to deal with a respondent. There is fairness. Okay? For example, if I'm researching on alcohol abuse, and then I decide to report in my dissertation. From my respondent, Dennis, he said he has abused alcohol for 10 years. Is that fair? One of the things we consider is confidentiality. No. Yeah. One of the things we consider is confidentiality. Two, we also consider permission granted. If before you interview anyone, before you admit the questionnaire, you ask for permission. Okay? You ask for permission. So those are some of the things that you consider. Others which are even more stringent, especially when it comes to healthcare, you actually need the permission of a research ethics committee. So for example, research which is maybe going to deal with maybe test trials on drugs or things like that, then you actually need to get permission from a research ethics committee. Okay? Now, last, we're going to talk about data methods, but we shall go further with them. So the data methods.
Maybe.
Yes, please.
Maybe, Doctor.
Yes, please.
When we ask ourselves fair, we mean fair to who? To the respondent, to the researcher, to the research community, to what? Fair to who exactly?
It's good you mentioned actually all of them. Thank you. One, to the respondent. Two, to the research committee. So things like, when we talk about things like plagiarism, yeah, that is to the research community. Yeah. There is also, of course, fairness to the researcher, him or herself. And in this case, it is what is expected of you at what level. At master, an example of what I would give, for example, at master's level, what would be expected of you? At master's level, what would be expected of you? At PhD level, what would be expected of you at undergraduate level? So it's good you raise that point. So of course, there are different players. There are different stakeholders in research. So yes, the research community is one, and the typical example would be issues of plagiarism. So for example, let me give you an example in UMU. Once you submit your dissertation, it's tested for plagiarism. And if there's a certain percentage found, your research will be rejected automatically. So things like that. So I hope I answered the question there.
Yes, but maybe to get more clarity in this question, in this context where you said Dennis had abused alcohol for 10 years.
Yes.
As now let me pose it like this. Assuming I kept Dennis anonymous, but still mentioned one of my respondents abused alcohol for 10 years.
Exactly. Yeah. Now, normally what we do when we're reporting findings, we code our respondents. So for example, if it's a qualitative research and you interviewed 7 people, of whom Dennis could be one of them, but now you will code Dennis as maybe respondent 7. So you say, in my interview with respondent 7, he reported that he had abused alcohol for 10 years and the effect was blah, 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 blah. Something like that. So in that way, Dennis's identity is covered, but at the same time reporting directly what he or she said, what he said about the experience of alcohol abuse. Does that answer the question?
I get it now when you say fair. I get what you mean.
Yes. Yes, Arthur.
I have a question. What if the research is in a closed circle, and in a way, for people reading the results of the research, they would actually know who this person is? How would you address the issue then?
A closed circle. But what would you say closed circle? If that circle is just a clinic where they know Dennis, then is that research?
Like what I'm saying is that because usually after the research, then you're going to publish. So then, if among the you interviewed, or perhaps maybe the respondents knew each other, and somehow they could guess who this person is. Maybe it's an investigation of maybe corruption or something. And the research now uncovers and exposes someone to maybe danger or legal whatever. I don't know. I don't know what I would explain the closed circle, but maybe it's just something I'm just thinking.
Then I would say that is your area researchable?
Oh,
that's where questions arise. Is that a researchable area? Because if it comes to threatening lives, or there is absolutely no way you can ascertain, you can ensure confidentiality, would that be a wise area to pick to research?
Then no.
Someone is asking, is a case study supposed to be an entity like an organization? Yes, it can be an organization, it can be a community. You can have multiple case studies. For example, you can have, let's say if one is doing research on universities and adoption, and they say, I'm doing research in Makerere, Umu, and maybe Nkumba. That's a multiple case study area. So yeah, it could be a community, it could be, depending on what you're researching. Okay. May I request that we take a break here, because we're studying at the end of the day, and then pick up from this tomorrow, especially for data collection tools. I would like to combine them with research methods. Is that okay?
Yes, doctor.
Yeah, that is fine.
Okay. Yes. Arthur, you have a question?
Yes, just one question I've been thinking about. So when you said credibility of research findings, who your audience is, in terms of like finding funds to do the research, if my audience also is maybe an implementing partner who is interested in the product that I'm going to be researching on, how then would I express their interest in the research without compromising on the requirements that the university has as well?
Sorry. Could you repeat the question again? Just repeat it.
Okay, the question is in terms of choosing your audience. If also my audience is an implementing partner who has interest in the results of this research and could actually potentially also fund the research, how would I incorporate their interests without losing out on the requirements for the university? Yes.
Yes. So in other words, you're talking about objectivity, because someone is funding you.
Yes.
They may want results to go one way.
No,
You
no,
said
no,
it?
like no, like that, like in a way, like I need like someone is interested in the results of the research, but then you said that we need to do the research based on we need to choose our audience. So if my audience
the
is as well
audience.
someone who is going to fund,
Yes,
yes, yes.
The audience, the way you write it, of course, what I'm talking about there is the way you write depends on the audience. So, for example, if it is sponsorship is usually a grant. So the grant wants the research to go a certain way. Yeah, they particularly want to go. For example, if you're like one time Umu received a grant on rural connectivity using wireless, and that was research going a particular way. So let us say if me as a researcher, I wanted to do I wanted to look at open source, and this one is talking about connectivity, rural connectivity. You see, I am automatically, my research area has to go towards rural connectivity and Wi-Fi and wireless. I have to choose a research topic in that format. Do you get? Do you
Yes,
understand
doctor.
that?
Yes,
that
doctor.
is the sponsor dictating. Now, the other side is, I talked about the faculty, for example. I know for a fact this isn't always the case. IS and ICT research doesn't always have to be artifact based, but at UMU they really prefer that you design an artifact, whether it's a framework, a model, or a system, or an app. So you see already there's a line, a direction you have to take. Do you understand what I'm saying, Arthur?
I understand what you're saying, doctor. I understand you.
Yeah. We have any other question?
Thank you, doctor.
You're welcome.
Yes, doctor, I have a question.
Yes, please.
It's still about generalization. Does that
Yes.
mean if you do research and the findings are not generalizable in another research setting, did you say that research would not be valid?
No, it is no. If they find they are not found in the other, as long as you follow the scientific method, your research is valid. It just means
so
there was a negative result somewhere else.
Oh.
Yes.
So then mention it, like to bring it out clearly that they cannot be generalizable.
Now you
Oh,
try
it's not up to
you carry out those formats, but however, even when you're reporting, we normally say the results probably point to this. We don't put it in a stamp that it is the absolute truth.
Okay.
Yeah, that's really how we report in our findings, that this probably means this, until another research builds on your research. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other question?
Maybe, Doctor, I wish to inquire from you. Are there chances that if, for example, I have some topics of interest in research, I forward them to you so that we kind of talk about them? Is it okay?
No, that is no, there's no problem with that at all.
Thank you, Doctor.
You're welcome.
Doctor, my question is in relation to the expectations, more expectations from us as to our dissertations. My question is the viability of the of the past dissertations done by WUMU students. Are they in in the library.
They should be there. I think they submit a soft copy, and the library keeps a repository of those.
Oh, okay. And then another thing that I would like to understand is the referencing and citing of our work.
Yes.
As to whom, which referencing style is recommended?
It is Harvard, and I think I think there should be a documentation, either in SPGS or it should be in the handbook, which clearly shows the format. But it's Harvard.
Okay.
It's documented in the handbook.
Okay, thank you, David.
Thank you.
Any other question or comment? If not,
hello, Doc.
yes, please. Yes, Bradley.
So if okay, the thing, the way I understand these things, should I do like in case they come, do I need to explain them the way they are, or in a way in the format I've understood them, as long as I bring out the actual context?
Regarding the
way, like the terms and all that, like what if I relate them to my, let's say, research I'm working on,
yes,
so that I can explain them using my own.
You mean in your dissertation?
Research.
You mean in your dissertation?
Not only dissertation, even let's say work and all that.
Yeah, that
like
is fine. You relate. You of course you explain the way you understand.
Okay, thank you, Doctor.
You're welcome. Any other question, comment?